hello, everybody. This is Tripp, and I'm with my friend, Brian McLaren, and we're going to talk about a road trip. We're going to talk about all the different questions that are coming up in the life of the church moving forward, and I'm going to get to talk to Brian about his experience watching the first buddy road trip comedy with progressive spiritual themes, which means it's simultaneously the best and worst of the category. But yeah. So what do you think, Brian? We're here, and this is the beginning of a month where people can stream and watch the movie, and they could even wait till they get done to decide if it's like not too heretical that they want to donate to spreading the word. So you can donate when you watch it, or you can wait till you get done and be like, filth, 0, or send 1 cent just to mock us. You could do that.
That's fantastic. Well, first, Tripp, it's fun to be with you, and I'm so glad I got to watch the film. And I had a bunch of questions for you, if you don't mind me asking. Can we jump in?
Oh, yeah.
Well, so I wanted to hear, first of all, how did you get the idea for this? What was the germ of saying, I have a podcast that helps tens of thousands of people every month. I was a pastor. I've written books. I curate a line of books, all of the things you do. And they thought, you know what I really need to do is make a movie. Tell me how that happened.
Well, I think there's 2 answers. One that's not, connected to someone suggesting it and immediately thinking, I was in theater school. Clearly, after 18 years off, I should help write and star in a movie. Like, there's the hubris side. There's the parent side. I wanted to be able to look at my kids anytime they think they can't do something and go, I never made a movie before. And I was just like, yes. But I think the most energizing side for me is, and you probably have experienced this too, when you write books, you create content, there are certain types of personalities and people that love that type of content who will have read all the Brian McLaren books. And they are friends with people similar to them who are like, I don't read books, or I don't listen to a podcast, or it was 90 minutes long and super nerdy. Like, just tell me, what does he think you can, like, Jesus gave people the planet and help the poor at the same time? Because that's cool, and having had, over 10 years doing the podcast, I regularly would meet at our events, live events, when I go to the podcast live and stuff, the friends of the nerd who aren't wrestling with the questions as nerds who love to go read and research it, but are living lives of faith where they think they're following Christ, they're doing the loving thing. It puts them in conflict with the perceived tradition, or they're just uncomfortable. And I thought, I could either create something for that group of people that does like nerdy for more evangelical types, which is boring to me, or just create a different type of content, a different type of story, so that people can wrestle with the questions in the context of a movie. Because there's a certain enveloping yet distancing from your own agenda act in a film.
Yep, I think that's really true. Plus, there is a kind of commitment, isn't there? Like, you can pick up a book, read a paragraph or 2, put it down. But when you're in a movie or you're watching it, you're kind of in it for a couple of hours. A book might be an 8 or 10 hour commitment, but for this movie, it's 2 hours, and it sort of has you to do something. That makes sense. So you were in theater school. Tell me about your acting experience before this. Because look, I got to tell you, I know you have high respect for you. You are a way better actor than I even expected. So I love watching you do that.
So I went to art magnet schools for middle school and high school. So after lunch, you just went to theater class. And I did lots of improv, was in an improv group. We did musicals and a comedy and a serious play every year. So I've been in a whole bunch of different things. My friends and I, our senior year of high school, wrote a 1-act that won the best student 1-act in the United States. And then the next year's seniors performed it at the Edinburgh Theater Festival, the Fringe Festival in Edinburgh. It was about Santa Claus had a drinking problem and a Jewish therapist, and he works out his issues, and a small kid that liked long distance running really helped him seize the Christmas spirit. But so I had that experience. I started college as a musical theater and philosophy major and realized I didn't need to go to school 5 years for 2 degrees without actual jobs at the end of it. So I stopped. But you know, there is a certain sense that if you're trying to keep teenagers entertained or introduce the introduction to the study of philosophy or religion to undergrad students who are forced to take a required class, all of those take a certain theatrics. Um, and, you know, in LA, you're with a lot of people that, you know, you're like, I'm friends with him. I, he wrote a Marvel movie. How hard can it be? Because we're friends. So I think that was part of it. Like, people around you did it all the time. So I thought, yeah, why not?
That's great. That's great. So that makes sense. Now the framing of the movie itself, uh, I I got to say, I have a couple favorite scenes I'd love to talk to you about. But I think my single favorite thing about the movie is the road trip scenes. Just the scenes for people who haven't seen it yet, and I hope you'll watch it soon. Cleo, who's a youth pastor, and Larry, played by Tripp, who is a sort of weird, apparently homeless, somewhat mentally unstable, but extraordinarily exuberant and confident character. But as they're just traveling along, I've just got to say, I love the cinematography. I love the shots of this dilapidated white van that I can just imagine what it smelled like with a couple of guys living in it. But that just the road trip idea and the scenes of two guys in various sorts of trouble heading down the road. I love that. And talk to me about that.
Well, so the story itself is kind of a play. Like, if Hot Tub Time Machine was the context for retelling the story to Emmaus. So we were like, we're going to be in Colorado. We're going to be in Oklahoma. What's a town that starts with E? And it was like Edmond. So Cleo, the only character named in the Emmaus story in the Gospel of Luke, is Cleopas. So he's that character. And something you discover about both of them through the movie is they both have a background in youth ministry. Now, where in youth ministry do the most sacred breakthroughs happen? It's not actually in the worship service or the things you planned. It's in the extremely exhausted time you get stuck sitting in a van.
Yep.
So the idea of the van, which is named White Lightning, is that is a special place for youth ministers, where the kid who didn't want to say it in front of something opens up, or whereas you actually find out what music your youth minister listens to, or whatever. There's tons of space. So we kind of envisioned the time in White Lightning as the time where these two people are trying to work out their issues. Like, we thought Jesus was a Messiah, but then he died, and now we're like all disappointed. Both Larry and Cleo have this baggage with the church, but this experience with the living God, they're trying to wrestle with it. So one of the things I love about all those scenes is it's not till you get to the end of the film, I think, that you realize that the van was one of the main characters.
Exactly.
And
right.
that they go on this story, and they're beautiful pictures. And Dave and I, we're talking about it, but Dave, the producer, went on all sorts of weird websites to find cool places to visit in the two states where we were going. And we go to that crazy castle, we go to an arcade, and like lots of different places. We found some, or we knew people in the area and they helped us find it. So that whole road trip element visually, I think, is important, but also the spaces. When you're making an independent film, it was like, here's 2 weeks we could do it. Here's where like Pete Rollins and I were doing beer camps on the weekends. So we just filmed between the weeks and we put the movie there. So the ride between Oklahoma and Colorado is that beautiful. It just is. If you've never driven across the whole country, which I did when I moved from California to North Carolina, I there's a lot of empty space, and a lot of it's super beautiful, especially in the middle.
I mean, if somebody had told me that there was that kind of beautiful space in Oklahoma and eastern Colorado, I would have been surprised. And you know, there's something about as I was watching the film and sort of feeling the drama of characters who, especially this young youth pastor Cleo, who has inherited this kind of constrictive religious framework. He's not fitting in that tight box anymore. And then suddenly you zoom out and you see white lightning going down a highway in a huge, beautiful, expansive green field. You know, just this sense of expanse.
You froze for me for a second.
And I got a little sign that said our connection was unstable. So I hope it's stable again. But
Oh,
whoop, can you hear me again?
oh I can hear you now.
Okay, great. So but I was just I was just talking about that sense of expansiveness in the scene, in the scenes of you guys heading down the road, that, and also the sense of movement. We're going somewhere.
Mhm.
That all of that sort of evokes the Exodus. It evokes all the journeys of the disciples. It certainly evokes the road to Emmaus. And I sort of assumed that you picked Cleo because of the Emmaus story. So here's some fresh encounter. So, and for folks who haven't seen the film, of course, it ultimately is about a kind of loss of faith and a rediscovery of something real, a new kind of encounter. What scenes of the film are you especially proud of?
Well, because of homebrewed Christianity, I've had the email from a youth minister in Cleo's situation sent to me hundreds of times,
Yeah,
where they're at a church, and this is, I think, important for progressive Christians to hear, right? Like, uh, a lot of times we get to a place where it's easy to dismiss places we've been before or
yeah,
places we've never been, because it makes so perfect sense to us where we are. But I know there are thousands of leaders in the church who are like Cleo, and they are sitting there, and they've had genuine encounters with the divine in this tradition, the very community that called them and are like, here's your first time in ministry being a youth minister. And then there are people like Cleo who then like trust the intuitions of the Spirit and are welcoming to someone that comes out, but then they also feel like they're disingenuous to the situation they're in. And then you hear from the minister, in the senior minister who's mentoring this youth minister, who's like, I'm so proud of you. You have a lot of courage. If I didn't have, children and health insurance, I would.
yeah,
So to me, the scenes that are most important in the film, or ones I'm proud of, have been when people that are in those situations, like Cleo or the senior minister,
yeah,
don't feel like we're patronizing them, but actually displaying like, this is a real predicament. Yeah, I am a senior minister, and I am proud the youth minister's pushing the edge because I don't think I can. Or the youth minister goes, yeah, like, I love that job. I love working with these students. I love being a part of them growing up. And it was the right thing. And yet I don't know if I can still be there anymore. The the challenging part for me wasn't like coming up with jokes that my character would say. Uh, um, it was, how do we portray the genuine humanity of people struggling with questions of faith, that for those of us that are more progressive Christians, they're they're like make or break issues. You should just tell us up front. But this is someone in a different church, in a different space. And how do
yeah.
we honor where they are?
Boy, it's funny you say that, because this morning I was sketching out an outline for what may well be my next book, and I was realizing that I want to write a book for the people, for the 14-year-old kid who is in 2019 where I was, when I was 14, a long, long time ago, because every day a couple thousand people have their inherited fundamentalism begin to collapse on them, and and including pastors. There's a 35-year-old pastor today who's going to say, I can't live with this anymore, or maybe who makes a decision, I'm going to stop being honest from today forward. I'm going to say what they want to hear, but it's no longer what I really think
Mm-hmm.
because I need health insurance or whatever it is. And the drama of all of that, I was just thinking today, a whole lot of us, we think, oh, I dealt with that question years ago. I'm way, way beyond that. And it's very easy for people to forget how important those people are who need to grapple with that today and tomorrow and next week.
Mm-hmm.
And,
Yeah.
and you had those folks in mind.
Yeah, and I think the other scene, the other two scenes that were most important was the wedding, because I wanted the only time the movie felt as preachy as a Christian movie ever is to be when the screen is full of two women getting married and the gay men's chorus of Denver. Like when you hear the most straightforward sermon about the power of friendship to keep people in covenantal relationships throughout life, I wanted it that moment, right? So I wanted to nail that scene, and editing it, Dave had a chore because I was like, no, I'm doing the whole sermon. You can decide how much you want in. Because they're like, well, we don't need that much. I was like, no, this is important. So they filmed the entire wedding. I mean, I did my whole sermon. It was stuff. And then the last scene, next to last scene, at the graveyard, was important because there's a whole lot about my character you discover. The pace of discovery picks up throughout the film, from the second half on, and when it ends, our goal there was, if you came in as a conservative Christian and immediately judged me, while if you were an atheist or a post-Christian, you're identifying with where this Christian movie has a guy saying all the things I think, and he knows more about it, so it's even funnier. The goal is that by the end, if you were judging my character because of what he says and does up front, you go, if I experienced what he did, I could have been that cynical and burned and hurt. And if you were someone who identified with the critique in a way because of your own pain and stuff like his, you see him finding the freedom to recognize the presence of God in Cleo, who befriended him and actually helped him process the death of his dad.
Yeah.
So that last scene kind of was tying together a lot of the emotional energy that is present, but you don't get the details till right at the end.
Those are the two scenes that I think will stay with almost everybody who watches the film. Really, really powerful scenes, and I don't want to dwell on this too much, but man, your acting was good, and you touched something. It's in that grave scene especially, that was just phenomenal. In the scene where you are about to go in to perform this wedding, which you do a nice job of, we just did a spoiler for some people, but you rip out a collar and stick it in, and it was a little bit like Superman ripping off his vest or something, or shirt. It was this moment of surprise and revelation of a different side of Larry. That was nicely done.
Well, it does. When you do realize it makes more sense how he accidentally found the parables in Luke to harass him when they're by the campfire earlier. Yes. Right? Like the first time I watched it with a group and someone leaned over, is like, where's this guy that's never even seen a Bible before accidentally open up to the prodigal son and the lost coin and the lost sheep? I'm like, just keep watching. It's okay. And then, and so Larry's sitting there with this, like, I can't believe like my character's experience of that scene is like, oh my God, one, I got stuck with a minister. This is ridiculous. I don't even want to know anything about me. So he's not going to tell him. And then he's the worst kind. Again, Larry, who's sitting there as this person, he's like, I don't even want to claim the religion anymore. And you're probably one of the reasons why. You remind me of my dad. And, but since I have to, I am going to lampoon you by reading the Bible to you. And so it's not till then that you go, oh, okay, I get why he was lecturing him earlier.
Yeah, exactly right. Exactly right. Yeah, your character comes across as so bizarre and so over the top and so you know, borderline incoherent at the beginning, and not incoherent in speech, but just so many different parts of them. How does it all fit together? And by that end, oh yeah, yeah, Larry makes sense. All that craziness makes sense. Um, uh, One of the things I thought as I watched this movie is I thought, who is going to be able to watch this movie? Because I can't imagine too many youth groups uh, bringing it in. You know, I can't remember how many F words or whatever else are in there, but there's enough to make the language police sweat. Uh, so tell me, where do you imagine this? What scenes do you imagine this being shown? What settings?
Well, no, there's only one F-bomb
Okay.
because we were hoping that if it got rated, it'd be PG-13, but then we found out that if you use narcotics on screen, it's automatically R. And the Leviticus joke's too good not to have in the movie, which is an actual story. As a youth minister, I caught a kid rolling a joint with a Bible, and he was using the Gospel of John, and I got so mad. I'm like, one, like out of all the things in the Bible to roll a joint with, you're gonna pick the Gospel of John? That's horrible. I mean, you got Leviticus, and it's packed full of stuff that you could just smoke away. But you're gonna go for like John, the prologue of John, and two, you shouldn't do this at a youth group. He's like, I'm sorry. I'm like, yeah. Next time use Leviticus. And he was like, all right, puff puff past Leviticus. And
Oh my.
I was like, ha, that's funny. And occasionally I would joke when I told the story to friends. I'm like, yeah, that one should get in the movie. And then we were sitting there. I was like, Dave, I have an idea. So yeah, I do think there's people who aren't the ideal audience for it. And the normal places that a Christian film is distributed are definitely not going to opt for this one. But I think part of it is that churches and Christian entertainment industry is yeah. Oh, there's Brian.
Sorry, I don't know
Oh,
what happened there.
no. So I was just saying, I think part of the reason something like this doesn't fit in a lot of church settings where the ideas portrayed do is it too often the church sanitizes so much of life out of it that then when you do a story tackling these issues and these experiences, to make it fit for that audience or that natural Christian setting, you have to edit. And then it would be hard to buy the characters and stuff if they weren't that coarse, and then it would only be half as funny.
So I'll tell you, as I pondered that question, where does this film get watched? One of the things that hit me is this film might do its best work getting watched in somebody's home, being watched by individuals, because probably the people who are going to be helped by this most, there aren't many social settings. And in other words, the movie becomes like the car that you're going to get into and take a trip for a couple hours, because you can't let anybody else know that you're even thinking about these things
Mm-hmm.
in a whole lot of settings.
Oh yeah. And we've had a number of people do kind of house parties and stuff, and it's real funny where, a minister will throw a house party and have 15 people from their church over, but the chance they're going to invite the whole church or show it at their church is very small. Um, but you know, I do think that's one of the reasons. I mean, that's one of the reasons we're hoping this month, when it's available for people to stream anywhere on whatever device and stuff, is that you don't just end up watching it, but you end up telling other people about it, because I mean, there are two parts. Like, one, like, we want people to watch it. So the amount of work we put into it is so significant, you want someone to watch it. And the second part is, I think the more uh film, but not just films, any art that kind of fits into this genre exists, the more opportunities you have
Yeah.
to let people know that are struggling, wanting to know if their questions they're raising about their faith and stuff, if there's a community behind it.
Yeah.
It's like why something like Wild Goose is important, even if you don't want to go camping, is because it's the only time in North Carolina that many progressive Christians will gather and affirm all your questions and all your uniqueness,
Yeah.
and do it with art or spirituality or music or whatever. That the ecosystem of a new kind of Christianity, you might want to say,
Yes. There you
um,
go.
it I think needs to find it. And as we find audience for these type of things, it makes it more reasonable to do them, because, like, I mean, we basically did the film for $30,000, and uh, almost everybody volunteered all their time to do it. So it's a giant, is a the most produced hobby ever.
That's fantastic. Well, I would like to talk. I was hoping we could talk a little bit about kind of the almost invisible member of the story, which is the girl whose predicament, uh, opens up this whole drama.
Mhm.
And I, I- so we've got a gal who comes out to her youth group leader that she's lesbian, and this creates a crisis because the church wants the pastor to, I don't know, send her away for re-education or something, make her feel guilty and make her want to change. And all the pastor does is tell her that God loves her. And that's enough of a transgression that now he's, on administrative leave. But it sort of brings to light, or it raises for me this, how interesting it is that this is the issue that has been the tip of the iceberg, or this is the issue that's opened all of this up. And I know you've thought about this whole lot, but why do you think it is that this is the issue that has become, pardon the pun, but it's the tinder that got the whole thing going?
Well, I think there are three reasons. One is it's a place that there's no Bible text you point to as a solution.
Mm.
So when the church gives full dignity to people, regardless of their sexual orientation and sexual identity, then you, in a sense, are admitting that your, like, sola scriptura is not final.
Mm.
The second one, in America, what I think this is a big deal, because we inherited a lot of purity culture stuff. And
Yeah.
so, of the things we've lost our biscuits about, policing bodies, especially minorities' bodies, is a habit of American Christianity, from slavery to native peoples when we got here, to women, and even our children. Like, American culture accepts much more violent punishment for longer, for crimes, all the way down to parenting in the West. But the other countries move past penitential forms of punishment. So policing bodies and being threatened by difference is an issue, and I think a lot of it is connected to purity culture and the purity strive for sameness. And so the way identity politics is played out in the West, uh, especially because of the way the market shapes things, and identity becomes something you receive and then it's marketed to, that new options essentially are seen as validated by acceptance. And I think that just for a purity culture where sameness is important is problematized. And I think the third one is much like why the church has done better at uh the the liberation issues you have the most contact with are the ones we've made the most progress on.
Mm.
So that, like, that's why we've worked for like integration of schools in the military and things like that. That's why the feminist movement early on said its best asset was that we married patriarchal men, because you had the contact. So I think this issue has become the tinderbox of sorts, because it's, it recognizes you're kind of post biblical only. It's connected to sex and policing and purity culture, but also as the culture itself has been more affirming when people come out, all of a sudden there's difference that pops up in a community like your church where you assumed other things about them. So then you're like, what do I even know? Like, we can't have the Bible. The culture's changing and fluctuating, and now these people are coming out around me, and there's an intensity there. And I've noticed it for those reasons when I talk to conservative people, that it's a big deal. For the anxiety I hear is more connected to how this signals such a rapid change of pace and a rapid changing of authority, more than of course, like, I'm going to be nice and love this person, but as an issue, it's threatening.
Yeah. As you say that, something that struck me in what you said. I never really made the connection between purity culture and homogeneity, but in a sense, I can see it. If we define purity as sameness, then diversity is impurity.
Mm-hmm.
And this is, I think, one of the big struggles in our culture today, with all of the resurgence of white supremacy and so on. There's a group of people for whom purity means sameness, and diversity just feels dirty from the start, and that just evokes so much from the New Testament. Jesus saying, it's not what goes into you that makes you impure. Like he's defining purity culture in his own day. He's having to struggle with that in his day. And it's no surprise that we're still struggling with that in ours. It reminds me of something that our mutual friend, Gareth Higgins, said to me years ago. I think he's written this as well, which is that one of the gifts that the LGBT community has given the church in its courageous process of coming out is not just getting us to talk about homosexuality, but getting us to talk about sexuality, because we've all been so closeted about our sexuality. And I just got in the mail Nadia Bolz-Weber's new book on that subject. And
Mm-hmm.
I just think that's another great thing in the film. A couple moments where there's some real candid talk about sex, and my gosh, I think that's also part of what's going on, isn't it? We've had this regime of propriety and politeness that's also being broken.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in the film, the issues around purity culture, the first fight we had about it in the church was around divorce, which is with his dad, and the dad's issue when Larry's wife leaves him is that how can you be a minister if you're divorced? And so the button you see in his dad's suitcases stamp out first marriages, which was a Southern Baptist produced button from back in the day, where if you were divorced, you couldn't be a minister anymore, and all that kind of thing. So I do think but you can figure out a way to include divorced people, even though Jesus is explicitly against it. Because you're like, well, that was one sin, but if you're gay, you just stay in sin. That's really the logic that's there. So I think there's the issues of sexuality have been repressed way before even the issues of LGBTQ issues come up, because bodies in a hyper intellectualized understanding of faith, where faith is primary assent. The body is the means that supports the spirit or the mind that does the religious, faithful things like believing. And then the primary goal for your body is to have controlled it, as opposed to thinking your bodies are things to enjoy. Um, and and so, yeah, it it is a good gift because I mean, uh, I, after one of the times we screened the film in Denver, I was talking with a older pastor who came, and her and her husband were both pastors, and they came, and she said that uh, the thing that stuck out the most was the way in which old repressive things shaped Larry's dad, right? That then you just pass it down, and what we're really getting back to is back to a Christianity that has an incarnation, and that Western Christianity has excarnated itself off the body, and this is one more opportunity for us to defend, privileging the mind over the whole self.
Yes, my gosh. And then that becomes an act where you have heterosexual, usually men, but sometimes women, in positions of spiritual power, who are sitting across the table from a fellow human being in agony, and who are filled with self-doubt and concern about rejection because of their awareness of their sexual orientation. And I cut off all of that. I cut off the tears. I cut off all of that's a distraction. The only thing that counts is an abstraction
Mm-hmm.
of this is right, this is wrong, according to the systematic theology I inherited, and so on. Yeah.
Well, I mean, here's the funny thing is, youth ministers are the contact point so that parents and the rest of the church can outsource having to talk to them about their bodies anyway. Right?
Oh,
like, well, you go on a retreat and do that away from your parents and the rest of the congregation, because when you come back, you learn you aren't a sexual being until you get married. And that just sets everyone up for guilt. Like, when we screened the film here in North Carolina, one of my friends, who I'm sure he meant well, I won't use his name, said, now, don't you think some of those jokes you made were over the line? And he specifically referenced the how far's too far joke. And I was like, I would literally heard that from a teenager. They were like, so is it second base if you touch the areola or not? Because I just need to know. And like, that is what a 15-year-old full of hormones who also wants to follow the rules sounds like.
Yeah.
And and I heard youth ministers since then have told me things people asked. The number of youth ministers that have said that they had students who were regularly engaged in anal sex because they still wanted to be a virgin.
Yes.
And they also are anti-gay. I'm just like, things like that, all the way to they will, after their dates, sit and sext each other because that way they can't actually physically engage.
Yeah.
And so, when you aren't going to change these beautiful bodies we have and what it's like when it becomes an adult and all the hormones are there and your frontal cortex is developing.
Yep.
But the tradition we have, Christianity, actually has a wisdom in it about being bodies and having communities where you become an adult and have maturity. Like, you could learn to look at people and not think I want to screw them. It's a great idea. Jesus had it. And it was in a Sermon on the Mount. And what is his whole distinction is not like, you've heard it said, don't bang your neighbor's wife. Why don't you just not think about them that way? Like, it's an invitation to cultivate a character that doesn't see humans as objects.
Yes.
And I think the way we normally frame our bodies in this policing purity way says your body's bad, all bodies are bad, they are objects, and they're out to deceive you. So you got to police them. as opposed to these are instruments and gifts from God for doing and making beautiful things. And there will be times that types of intimacy are perfectly appropriate and celebrated. And that's where you came from. Like so yeah, I mean there really are consequences about it. Um and you only saw the jokes that got in the movie. There were a number of them that that didn't. um the the montage, because so in that first scene where we're in, and I'm giving him a hard time once I find out he's a minister. We had rented these, I don't know what they're called, but things that sit in the front and stabilize the cameras, but the van was so crappy they didn't work. So that scene's kind of parts from all the times they were riding, because we only wanted one time that you were behind them, in the because we could only shoot from the sides, that
Right.
because the steady cam things didn't work. And I was getting interviewed for a newspaper about it the other day, and he goes, I just love that opening scene. It's like you're sitting in the back and slowly you get invited into this relationship. And I was like, yeah, it's obviously why we did it. It's not because the Steadicam thing didn't work. He's like, it was so good. You're like overhearing this conversation and you're catching it, and then like y'all get out of the car and all of a sudden you're with them. And I was like, yeah.
A lot of beautiful art happens by accident, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Or because of broken equipment. Oh my goodness. Well, I must say, I mean, I've been involved with projects where after I'm done, I'm exhausted. And the last thing, it's probably like, having a baby and somebody comes to the mom and says, when do you want to have your next baby? It's like, that's the last thing I want to think about. But do you think you're going to do any more of this in the future?
Well, what I enjoyed it. I really have enjoyed the different types of interaction you have. Because it's set here. My experience has been, even people that listen to the podcast and stuff a lot, the film is it's just very different type of engagement. They'll ask you about it, you can talk about it, and I'm not in charge of a film. Like when you write a book, like there are things I wrote in the book because they were like, pick a different story, or you had one conversation and you kind of planned it out. But people could take take things as if you had some like really like, I planned this whole thing out, it's super important and I'm complete control. And for you it was like, I needed another story here or whatever. A movie, you aren't the only person a part of it, so it's like the most fun part is like, it's this giant team effort. You don't really know how awesome it's going to be till you get done, and then people with skills you could never have are all a part of it. And then Dave, that we're recording it, and he's like, oh, Tripp, you should talk more. I don't even know if we're going to have 90 minutes for the movie. So we record all this stuff, and then he's like halfway through the film on the first set, he's like, you talk forever. I'm cutting out stuff. And so like, I'd love to do it again where, having done it, you think about what you learned in the process and things. Yeah. And like obviously, according to Alicia, she's like, you have to have gotten paid something for the first film you make before you go make the next one, unless they're just going to pay up front. You can't be like, I'm going to go on a 2-week road trip, hardly sleep, and come back really excited to then go tell people about what I did while you were in charge of all the kids by ourselves. But yeah, I would love to. And so, if somebody is sitting around saying they want to fund another progressive Christian ish film, that then I'm more than happy. I did write an outline for another movie that is pretty entertaining. Like knowing how you could do it on a low budget and do it, then take like a dark comedy and put it in a post-apocalyptic scenario on the Appalachian Trail. And so all through montages of the past and news things, do you catch all the stuff that's going along? And then you have this family that has this whole other relationship that's having to decide whether or not, when they discover the civilizations there, they re-engage or not. So you get like kind of cultural, philosophical, theological reflection on your relationship with nature when they're living kind of purely in nature, then
Yeah.
seeing the culture, connecting the culture, and the family super devout Catholics, and there aren't Catholics anymore in the post-apocalyptic burgeoning culture. And I thought, what what would happen if like the archetype of Catholic mom was everyone's new superhero? That was the idea what I had for when I started writing the stories. Like, what would happen if a Catholic mom, like, not like conservative Catholic, I mean, like you actually believe in the social ethics of the Catholic Church, but you're like a Catholic mom who has been off the grid for years, and you rediscover civilization, and then you're getting to know it, and the mom's the hero, and so you see everything from in the story from the mom's point of view, where she has the allegiance to her children, and is questioning, readopting technology and connecting to society. So you go from the historic Christian tradition, what is the critique of technology and culture and all these things? Um, and they're only the parents remember what it was like. The kids don't.
Now, this sounds great. This sounds great. Well, let's hope that that donor is out there ready to bring the funds together to make that happen. Who would you play in the movie?
Oh, the well, probably the husband of the in the family
Yeah,
who um is the yeah, anyway, I don't have to tell you the whole thing.
got it,
But
got it, got it.
no. But because this film, right, like is about a teenager who's not there.
Yeah.
And uh and you when she appears at the very end of the film, you actually don't hear anything. You only see her receiving the affirmation that comes from Cleo. I basically thought, if I got to tell another story, what would be a way that you're extremely intimate with from the female lead character?
Hmm.
It like, where is she authoring her story? And so at least the opening of it, the idea is to have, you have what's going on, but you also, the viewer is hearing her internal monologue, because
Hmm.
she's deciding what part of this world that exists does she introduce or share to her kids. Does she know whether, like, how much she's going to share the questions and thoughts she's having with other people? So uh yeah, anyway, so
Well,
that was what started it, when I thought, how do you tell a story um and it not be basically the two guys that are in a van.
that's great. Well, among other things I like about that is just getting a little window into how your creative mind works. Well, I don't know if there's anything you want to ask me about the film. I only really had one other question I wanted to ask you. Anything you want to ask me first?
Oh, well, when did you laugh the hardest?
Let's see. Um, well, I might be tempted not to be honest because it might have been at some of the sort of crude moments because I'm a big fan of stupid, crude male humor. But uh, I'll tell you when I had the biggest smile on my face. Just that movie scene. It just something about it. There was just this feeling of rightness and joy and health and humanity,
At the
and
wedding?
at the wedding, uh, especially because all of the angst that's happening on the ride and by the campfire and all that angst, and then in this one, suddenly Larry, this whirlwind comes in, and he's a sage and he's solid, and you find out people he's helped in the past. But I just remember having this feeling of there aren't that many times where you're just made to feel that happy in a movie, and that was a really pure happiness for me.
Well, this is pretty crazy. So at the Los Angeles premiere, uh, the couple that gets married proposed. So they got engaged in the Q&A after I mean, they were dating before
Yeah.
they did it, but Crystal, no, Sarah, I think Sarah was Dave's friend. But anyway, Crystal and Sarah got engaged at the premiere. So for Dave and I were trying to answer questions, celebrate the crew, and then they go and steal the night doing that whole getting engaged thing, and it was like, after the movie, you're already like emotionally there, because you laugh and then you cry, and then when you see like the couple propose who was I'm like sitting on the side, and I'm like my eyes are sweating, and yeah.
Well, I'll tell you the opposite moment for me was at the very beginning when Larry crashes into Cleo's bike and then invites Cleo into the car. And I'm thinking, don't go with him, man. Don't go with him. This could turn out to be deliverance, don't go with him.
I know it's funny. The people, a number of people were like, "Why do you get in?" And when people respond to the movie, and then others are like, "No, I mean, he took his Bible and he prayed and told God, like, I want to get an answer. So you just have to trust if God puts that in front of you, like it's the right thing." And I'm like, I don't know. The thing about that scene is we were wanted to film him riding later. So the first time we filmed that whole scene, it was not like we hit the bike and it kind of got dented and stuff. And then we were like, we got an extra 6 hours. We could go out of our way, go back to that place and film me running over it hardcore. So we went back and running over that bike a couple times was quite enjoyable. And then we're driving to drop everything off in Denver from there. And the van has just decided it doesn't want to exist anymore. And it goes slower and slower and slower before you couldn't go above 55 without the whole thing shaking, and people are going 80 on the interstate, and we're, and then when Dave got it after we got out at the airport, it died. So White Lightning had just enough juice to make the film, and then went off to wherever dead vans go.
White Lightning gave its all. That's great.
I know. It was a very canonic car.
That's great. Well, I am so glad you did this. You have. I think that homebrewed Christianity is one of the really important things happening in the theological world in planet Earth in this century, right? I really think it's important. And I think it's more important than most people begin to realize, even the people who really enjoy it. I think it's really important. But the fact that you went off in this direction and wanted to do this, I just have huge respect for you and for that project. And I hope lots of folks will take it in, and I hope it'll inspire them for their own creative projects. And you know what any kind of art, but especially film, I think does for us. At it, one of the many things it does is it humanizes the other, and there's just a whole bunch of others in that film that get humanized, and really nobody gets dehumanized. And so I really hope a lot of folks will watch it.
Thank you very much. And for everyone that wants to watch it, they can go to JesusLovesOurMovie.com, because we just try to have honest advertising. And JesusLovesOurMovie.com. Anytime in the month of February, you can watch it and pay whatever you want. If you feel the need to pay for the entire film or the next one, you can do that. Or you can just pay 1 cent with a note explaining our heresies. I'm happy to delete that email. So
actually, though, that's kind of a neat idea to think to think of this not as people paying to watch the movie, but investing in this creative process. I think that's a great way to see it.
Yeah. So Brian, I'm very glad you watched the movie. Now, our other mutual friends who keep saying they'll get around to it, I'll be like, Brian watched it. I thought we were friends, and he watched it and talked to me on the internet about it. Like, clearly you should.
Well, thanks, man. Well done, and I'll look forward to. I'm really looking forward to the next one. So, yeah.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, and thank you, Facebook people, for hanging out. And we will talk to you later.